Good day everyone, today I will be doing the summary and central characters of Macbeth Act 1, Scene 2. I will start off with the summary. At the military camp near his palace at Forres, King Duncan of Scotland asks a wounded captain for news about the Scots' battle with the Irish invaders, who are led by the rebel MacDonald. The captain, who was wounded helping Duncan's son, Malcolm, escape capture by the Irish, replies that the Scottish generals Macbeth and Banquo fought with great courage and violence. The captain then describes for Duncan how Macbeth slew the traitorous MacDonald. As the captain is carried off to have his wounds attended to, the Thane of Ross, a Scottish nobleman, enters and tells the king that the traitorous Thane of Cawdor has been defeated and the army of Norway repelled. Duncan agrees that the Thane of Cawdor be put to death and that Macbeth, the hero of the victorious army, be given Cawdor's title. Ross leaves to deliver the news to Macbeth. Now I will be starting by talking about the three central characters, starting with Macbeth. Because we first hear of Macbeth in the wounded captain's account of his battlefield valor, our initial impression is of a brave and capable warrior. This perspective is complicated, however. Once we see the Macbeth interacts with the three wishes, we realize that his physical courage is joined by a consuming ambition and a tendency to self-doubt. The prediction that he will be king brings him joy, but it also creates inner turmoil. These three attributes, bravery, ambition, and self-doubt, struggle for mastery of Macbeth throughout the play. Shakespeare uses Macbeth to show the terrible effects that ambition and guilt can have on a man who lacks strength of character. We may classify Macbeth as irreversibly evil, but his weak character separates him from Shakespeare's great villains, Iago in Othello, Richard III in Richard III, Edmund in King Lear, who are all strong enough to conquer guilt and self-doubt. Macbeth, the great warrior though he is ill-equipped for such a physic consequences of crime. Before he kills Duncan, Macbeth is plagued by worry and almost aborts the crime. It takes Lady Macbeth's steely sense of purpose to push him into the deed. After the murder, however, her powerful personality begins to disintegrate, leaving Macbeth increasingly alone. He fluctuates between fits of fevered action in which he plots a series of murders to secure his throne, and moments of terrible guilt and absolute pessimism is what is to follow. These fluctuates reflect the tragic tension within Macbeth. He is at once too ambitious to allow his consequence to stop him from murdering his way to the top, and too conscientious to be happy with himself as a murderer. As things fall apart for him at the end of the play, he seems almost relieved. With the English armies at his gates, he can finally return to his life as warrior, and he displays a kind of reckless bravado as his enemies surround him and drag him down. In this part, this stems from his fatal confidence in the witch's prophecies, but it also seems to derive from the fact that he has returned to the arena where he has been most successful, and where his internal turmoil need not affect his name, namely the battlefield. Unlike many of Shakespeare's other tragic heroes, Macbeth never seems to contemplate suicide. "Why should I play the Roman fool," he asks, "and die on mine own sword?" Instead, he goes down fighting, bringing the play full circle. It begins with Macbeth winning on the battlefield and ends with him dying in combat. Then we move on to Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth is one of Shakespeare's most famous and frightening female characters. When we first see her, she is already plotting Duncan's murder, and she is stronger, more ruthless, and more ambitious than her husband. She seems fully aware of this and knows that she will have to push Macbeth into committing a murder. At one point, she wishes that she were not a woman so that she could do it herself. This theme of the relationship between gender and power is key to Lady Macbeth's character. Her husband implies that she is masculine soul inhabiting a female body, which seems to link masculinity to ambition and violence. Shakespeare, however, seems to use her and the witches to undercut Macbeth's idea that undaunted metal should compose and nothing but males. These crafty women use female methods of achieving power, that is, manipulation, to further their supposedly male ambitions. Women, the play implies, can be ambitious and cruel as men, yet social constraints deny them the means to pursue these ambitions of their own. Lady Macbeth manipulates her husband with remarkable effectiveness, overriding all his objections. When he hesitates to murder, she repeatedly questions his manhood until he feels that he must commit murder to prove himself. Lady Macbeth's remarkable strength of will persists through the murder of the king. It is she who studies her husband's nerves immediately after the crime has been perpetrated. Afterward, however, she begins a slow slide into madness. Just as ambition affects her more strongly than Macbeth before the crime, so does guilt plague her more strongly afterward. By the close of the play, she has been reduced to sleepwalking through the castle, desperately trying to wash away any invisible bloodstain. Once the sense of guilt comes to roost, Lady Macbeth's sensitivity becomes a weakness, and she is unable to cope. Significantly, she kills herself, signaling her total inability to deal with the legacy of the crimes. Ending the discussion on the major characters, we will be focusing on the three witches. Throughout the play, the witches, referred to as the Weird Sisters by many of the characters, lurk like dark thoughts and unconscious temptations to evil. In part, the mischief they cause stems from their supernatural powers, but mainly it is as a result of their understanding of the weaknesses of a specific interlocutor. They play upon Macbeth's ambition like puppeteers. The witches' beards, bizarre potions, and rhymed speech make them seem slightly ridiculous, like characters of the supernatural. Shakespeare has them speak in rhyming couplets throughout Double, double, toil and trouble, fire, burn and cudgel bubble, in which separates them from the other characters who mostly speak in blank verse. The witches' words seem almost comical, like malevolent nursery rhymes. Despite the absurdity of their eye of the newt and toe of the frog recipes, however, they are clearly the most dangerous characters in the play, being both tremendously powerful and utterly wicked. The audience is left to ask whether the witches are independent, against toying with human lives, or agents of fate, whose prophecies are only reports of the inevitable. The witches bear a striking and obviously intentional resemblance to the Fates, female characters in both Norse and Greek mythology who weave the fabric of human lives and then cut the threads to end them. Some of their prophecies seem self-fulfilling. For example, it is doubtful that Macbeth would have murdered his king without the push given by the witches' predicaments. In other cases, though, these prophecies are just remarkable accurate readings to the future. It is hard to see Birnam Wood coming to Dunsinane as being self-fulfilling outside the limits of human compression. They embody an unreasonably instinctive evil.
Good day everyone. Today I will be discussing the central theme of Macbeth by William Shakespeare, the corrupting power of unchecked ambition. One of the main themes of Macbeth is the destruction wrought when ambition goes unchecked by moral restrictions. Ambition is an active theme in Act 1, Scene 2, seeing that Duncan rewards and trusts his subjects. This is the opposite of personal ambition. Ironically, he replaces one traitor with a much worse traitor. When the Thane of Ross arrives and describes how Macbeth defeated the Norwegian king, who now begs for a truce, Duncan proclaims that the treacherous Thane of Cawdor shall be put to death and that Macbeth shall replace him, thus replacing one traitor with a much worse traitor. We find the most powerful expression of unchecked ambition in the play's two main characters. Macbeth is a courageous Scottish general who is not naturally inclined to commit evil deeds. Yet he deeply desires power and advancement. He kills Duncan against his better judgment and afterwards stews in guilt and paranoia. Towards the end of the play, he descends into a kind of frantic madness. Lady Macbeth, on the other hand, pursues her goals with greater determination, yet she is less capable of withstanding the repercussions of her immoral acts. One of Shakespeare's most forcefully drawn female characters, she spurs her husband mercilessly to kill Duncan and urges him to be strong in his murder's aftermath. But she is eventually driven to destruction by the effects of Macbeth's repeated bloodshed. In each case, ambition, helped of course by the destructive prophecies of the witches, is what drives the couple to do even more terrible acts of brutality. The problem that the play suggests is that once one decides to use violence to further one's quest for power, it is difficult to stop. There are always potential threats to the throne, and it is always tempting to use violent means to dispose of them. Next, I will be discussing the symbol of blood in the play Macbeth. Blood is always closely linked to violence, but over the course of the play, blood comes to symbolize something else: guilt. Death and killing happens in an instant, but blood remains and stains. At the time when both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth feel most guilty, they despair that they will never be able to wash the blood, their guilt, from their hands. Blood is everywhere in Macbeth, beginning with the opening battle between the Scots and the Norwegians, which is described in harrowing terms by the wounded captain. In Act 1, Scene 2, the blood covering the captain makes him an unrecognizable monster, just as Macbeth, who is in this scene described as a noble hero who is brave and loyal to his king, will be transformed into a monster as he becomes covered in the blood of those he kills to achieve his ambitions. Blood symbolizes the guilt that sits like permanent stains on the conscience of both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, one that will haunt them to their graves. Lastly, I will discuss the elements of darkness in Macbeth. Macbeth is a play of darkness. Throughout the play, two things in particular play a part in setting the stage of darkness. These two things are character and theme. Each has its own part in setting up the darkness. Most of the characters in Macbeth are dark in their actions. Macbeth, in particular, is very dark in his actions, to the point that all the killing literally drove him to madness. The theme of Macbeth is very dark in its subject matter. The main theme throughout the whole play is death, death, and more death. First, we have Macbeth killing Duncan because the witches told him he wouldn't be king. Then later, we have the murder of Banquo. Next, we have the murder of Macduff's son. Later, while preparing for battle, Macbeth gets the news of his wife's death, which did not even sadden him because he was too preoccupied in preparing for his confrontation with the attacking force. Continuing with Macbeth's murder streak, the young steward is killed in a fight. Then, finally, in the end, Macbeth got what he deserved and was murdered by Macduff.